My family kicked me out of the family business because my brother framed me with false evidence to take it over. 4 years later, my father calls me from the hospital, begging for his dying wish. It all began 4 years ago, when my family decided to trust my brother and kick me out of our transportation business based on a lie he told. I won't go into details, but he fabricated some false evidence to frame me for theft in the company and presented it to everyone at my dad's retirement party. The documents and evidence he showed seemed real enough, but I'm sure even a basic investigation would have revealed to everyone that I wasn't behind it and was being framed. I begged my parents to listen to me, but I suppose they were in shock or something and weren't thinking clearly. They insulted me and told me not only were they firing me, but they also no longer wanted me to be part of the family. My dad was the one who referred to me as a desperate college dropout when my brother made those accusations against me at his retirement party. That's what truly shocked me beyond belief, because he was the one who told me it was okay to drop out of college after a few months to join the family business after finishing high school. I started college to get a business degree, but I just wasn't interested. I didn't think a degree in business would help me as much as the practical knowledge I'd gained working alongside my dad. So I told my dad about it, and he said it would be fine if I dropped out of college, as long as I wasn't sitting idle at home and actually worked in the business. That's why I dropped out of college, because my dad said it was fine. So using that against me was a low blow. I was only 24 at the time, so I was very young and naive. After being insulted, I just left the party and decided never to speak to them again. I was too angry to think rationally, and instead of filing a lawsuit for wrongful termination and getting what I deserved, I allowed my brother to interfere and get away with framing me for theft. Naturally, the family business also went to him after my dad's retirement, even though it was supposed to go to me. He had just graduated from college at the time and was only 21. But even so, my dad let him take over the company. I was really upset about that, and even tried to talk to some of my relatives, but they also cut me off because they believed the lie my brother had told. I also found it very difficult to find a job after that because people had heard that I'd been stealing from my dad's company, and the only reason they hadn't taken legal action was because I was his son. But since people believed I had stolen from the family business, I couldn't be trusted anymore. I was practically blacklisted and had a hard time finding work, so I struggled for quite a while. Honestly, I wasn't surprised that my brother had done something like this to me, because he'd always had it out for me since childhood. Unlike most normal siblings, our rivalry was a bit more intense, and I guess he couldn't stand the thought of the family business going to me and having to work under me if he decided to join us. That's why he decided to have me fired under the worst possible accusations just to take over the company. But I never expected my parents to act this way because, even though we had a fierce rivalry, they never encouraged it and always tried to calm things down instead of fueling our animosity. So for them to blindly trust him was shocking to me. Later, I found out my brother hadn't been entirely stupid. He'd been planting doubts in my father's mind long before this revelation, and had apparently even bribed some of my coworkers to talk to my dad about my odd behavior and some discrepancies in the company's finances to sow suspicion in his mind. Even so, I feel like they should have at least listened to me and given me a chance to clear my name instead of just insulting me and kicking me out. I should also have been smarter and less stupid by fighting for what was rightfully mine instead of letting it slip through my fingers. I'm pretty sure that if I'd decided to file a lawsuit against my family, I would have won without a doubt, and the company would have been mine since I had invested 3 years of hard work. And it was very obvious I was being framed for a crime I hadn't even committed. Anyway, I made a mistake by letting the ownership of the company go because I was too proud to talk to my parents. I thought filing a lawsuit would seem like begging for the company's ownership, and I wanted to prove to them that I didn't care. It was a really stupid decision, but I wasn't about to repeat my stupidity this time. 4 years have passed since then, and I had to move away because no one was willing to hire me in my hometown. Here, I run a small-scale delivery business and earn a decent salary, but it's nothing compared to the kind of life I would have had if I had taken control of the company as my dad had planned. So when my parents finally reached out to me last week, after almost 4 years of no contact, I decided to set some conditions if they wanted me to return to them. My parents reached out to me because my dad was on his deathbed. He'd always had heart problems, but they had gotten significantly worse in the past. It was part of the reason why he had to retire early because the stress of work was also affecting him. But I guess retiring didn't help much because even though he put my brother in charge, my brother was still very young and inexperienced. So my dad would have to manage everything behind the scenes anyway, which meant he wasn't getting the peace and relaxation he was supposed to have. In recent months, his condition had worsened considerably. My mom told me there was very little chance he would survive this. During the phone call, she said that over the years, they'd had doubts about the authenticity of the documents and evidence my brother had shown them to prove I'd been stealing from the company. On several occasions they'd wondered if they'd done the right thing by firing me and cutting me off from the family, but they'd been too scared to contact me in case my brother was right about everything. It had been a long time since then, so there was no point in conducting investigations now. Even if they did, it would probably mean losing contact with the only son they had left, as well as making it seem like they didn't trust my brother. Things had gotten very complicated. Now, the only thing my dad wanted was for me to return to the family and run the business alongside my brother. My mom told me this was his dying wish, and she was crying heavily while speaking to me. She said she really wanted me to come back so I could speak with my dad. I was moved, but I'm not 24 anymore, and I'm not as easily influenced as I once was. I told her I needed some time to think because 4 years had passed, and I had gone through a lot, especially for someone who wasn't even guilty in the first place. It wouldn't be easy for me to suddenly return to my family, and I told her I needed time. She agreed. The next day, after giving it some thought, I called her back and told her I would agree to return to the family, but only on one condition. I said I would only return to the family and see my dad if he agreed to fire my brother from the business. There was no way on earth I would agree to work alongside him after everything I had been through. He had hated me from the start, but falsely accusing me of something I hadn't done and letting me carry the blame, essentially ruining my life. Just because he was competitive and felt he deserved to take over the business more than I did wasn't something I could overlook. So regardless of whether my dad was going to recover or not, I wanted him to fire my brother and hand the business over to me instead. I wanted things to go back to how they were originally planned, and that would be the only way I'd agree to return to them. My mom was shocked and began saying they couldn't do that it was crazy to even ask for something like that because my dad was on his deathbed, and the only thing he should think about was the business. But you can't blame me for that. I've spent the last 4 years struggling to find a way out of problems that were caused only because they decided to fire me. In the previous call, my mom herself admitted that she and my dad had doubts about whether my brother had been completely truthful or not. Despite that, they decided not to contact me and only did so when my dad was at the very end. Whose fault is that? I can tell you it's definitely not mine. I wasn't going to feel bad for wanting to look out for myself. My mom tried to tell me that by imposing such a condition, I was no different from my brother. I told her she was right, that there was no difference because he had forced me to stoop to his level. In fact, I wasn't even going to blame just him. This was something all of them were responsible for, and now they could either do things my way or leave me alone because I wasn't going to make any more sacrifices. Then I told her exactly how much I had struggled to find work because of the lies that had been spread about me, and how I had to move to another city because of it. In this new city where I didn't know anyone, I had to start a business on my own to survive, and at first, I was living paycheck to paycheck. I had to work 2 jobs for a long time until my business started to do well. They didn't know any of this, which is why it was so easy for them to expect me to just come back and pretend like nothing had happened. But unfortunately for them, I wasn't going to forget. So I told my mom that when my brother made those accusations against me, it was easy for her and my dad to let me go. Those accusations were false, and if they couldn't let my brother go for my sake, then there was nothing I could do. The only proper punishment for it would be for them to spend the rest of their lives never seeing me again. Then I hung up before my mom could say anything else. I felt like I was ruining my life all over again because I could have just set aside my pride this time, joined the business, lived a better life, and even reconciled with my dad. But something was holding me back. I had already gone through so much hardship in these last 4 years, and I guess I just couldn't let it all go to waste by forgiving them so easily. Honestly, I didn't know if my mom would contact me again after that call, but a couple of days later, I got a text from my dad. He told me he was extremely ill, and as my mom had already told me, it was very unlikely he'd stay with us as long as he'd hoped. He wanted to make things right with me before he left for his heavenly abode, but I was making things unnecessarily hard for everyone in the family by imposing conditions like this, which simply weren't necessary. He said he sincerely wanted me to come back and be part of the family and run the business alongside my brother because, despite everything that had happened in the past, he still loved me. He believed my brother and I would set aside our rivalry, at least for his sake. If I couldn't even do that for a dying man, then maybe I didn't love my family as much as my dad loved me, which was disappointing to know. He then said I was free to make my own decision, but the conditions I had imposed were heartless and cruel, so he didn't know if he could make such a decision. Should I back down on what I said, or stand my ground and get what's mine? So, am I the jerk for telling my dad, who's on his deathbed, that I wouldn't come back unless he fired my brother and handed me the company? Update 1. I read all the comments, and first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts. I decided to stand firm on what I said, and informed my parents by sending my dad a message yesterday. It had been 3 days since he sent me that message, and I had thought about it extensively. Staying true to my words seemed like the most sensible thing to do. If it had been so easy for them to let me go from their lives, I'm sure it wouldn't be too hard for them to do the same with my brother, and for the right reason this time. If they still believed my brother was telling the truth about me being a thief who stole from the company, then I don't think they should have contacted me in the first place. Why would you want a thief back in your life? I sent them a message saying it wasn't fair for them to expect me to just return without questions, especially given the circumstances they had put me in after the lies my brother told. My own family had betrayed me, and I made many mistakes the first time. I wasn't going to repeat my mistakes again. If they wanted me to return to the family, they could do as I asked or leave me alone. To be honest, I was doing pretty well on my own here. Even if they decided not to accept my condition, I'd still be content with the life I've built for myself. But then my dad responded to my message by calling me and putting me in a very tough spot. He suggested that instead of them fulfilling the conditions I had set, maybe I could do them a favor instead. My dad asked if, instead of my conditions, he agreed to transfer the business completely to me and fire my brother, but the only other condition would be that I could never speak to him or any other family member again. Would I accept that condition? It put me in a tough spot, and I had no idea what to say at that moment. I told him I needed time to think it over, and he said I was free to do so. But it wasn't just a hypothetical situation he was suggesting. He told me that if I agreed, he would actually sign over the transfer of the company to my name. However, I could never see or speak to him again, not just him, but any member of my family. He even went as far as to say that I wouldn't be allowed to attend his funeral or have anything to do with him. It was a huge dilemma because I knew this was just a tactic to put me in a difficult position, but I wasn't going to let it affect me. After thinking about it for a couple of hours, I called my father back and told him I'd made my decision. He obviously assumed I was going to say I didn't want the company but wanted my family. Instead, I surprised him by saying I would prefer he sign the company over to me and that I was fine with never seeing or speaking to them again. He was silent for a few seconds, then started yelling at me, saying I was heartless and that he was ashamed to have raised a son like me. He even went as far as saying he wouldn't give me anything and that I was free to live on my own because I had just proven to him that I wasn't worthy of being asked to return to the family. I told him that was fine. I had already built a life for myself in this city, and the reason I found it so easy to say I didn't want to see them again and preferred the company was because they were the ones who prepared me for this. I told my father that if he hadn't thrown me out in the first place without a fair and proper investigation and hadn't allowed my brother's words to influence him, then I would have been just as attached to my family as I was in the past, and this would have been a real dilemma for me. Essentially, my father was just asking me if I'd be willing to sacrifice my family to get the family business, and I did the math in my head. I'd continue living the way I had for the past 4 years, but my life would be much easier and I'd have a lot more money. If I were a more emotional person, like I used to be before, I might have chosen my family. But I live in the real world and made the more practical decision, so they couldn't blame me for it because they were the ones who created this version of me. My dad tried to argue and said that when it came to family, you always had to involve emotions. But then I reminded him how he insulted and threw me out without emotions when my brother accused me of stealing. He did what was best for the company, so now I was doing what was best for my life. There's no difference between those two situations. I guess my dad didn't have a response for that, so he just hung up and hasn't contacted me since. Honestly, I don't know what's going to happen next with my father and the company, but I'm starting to feel less guilty about the condition I imposed. Update 2. A couple of days have passed since my last conversation with my dad, and he hasn't contacted me since. My mom has also been suspiciously quiet, so I had no idea what was going on until yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, when I got home from work and was freshening up, my phone started ringing. At first I decided to ignore it, but whoever was calling wouldn't stop. They kept calling over and over, until I finally answered out of desperation. It turned out to be my grandparents, who had also cut me off when my dad kicked me out of the family. My dad's father had passed away when he was very young, so it was just my mom's parents and my paternal grandmother on the phone. As soon as I answered, my grandmother started telling me that she was already losing her son and didn't want him to suffer more than he already was. She said that my last conversation with him had really affected him. He had been crying for hours after hanging up. She said she couldn't bear to see him suffer that way and wanted me to go back to him and just talk to him in person because that would be the right thing to do. She started crying on the phone, and it was really hard for me to ignore, but I wasn't going to back down. I told my grandparents that I was very sorry for putting my father in that position, but it wasn't my intention. I just wanted to tell him that he had left me in a very bad situation, and now I didn't feel obligated to help ease his guilt, that was all. I hadn't demanded anything that wasn't legitimately mine, and it was entirely his decision whether he wanted to leave me the company or not. However, I wasn't going to sacrifice my self-respect and dignity to return to the family that had treated me poorly. My grandparents tried to convince me that families go through tough phases, but as his son, it was my duty to forgive my father for his mistakes and at least try to move past this. But I don't share those beliefs, perhaps because I lost my family 4 years ago and I stood firm with them. Eventually, my mom's parents said this was a desperate situation and that I had become too selfish and blind to open my eyes to the reality of the situation and realize I was going to lose my father without being able to make amends with him again. They said not only was my father suffering but also my mom, who was about to lose her husband, which didn't seem to concern me at all, not even for her. They claimed she would be completely alone after he was gone, and I should be there for her as her son. But that simply wasn't true. She would have my brother and her parents. But I was the one who had been completely alone after everyone abandoned me over a bunch of lies. So forgive me if I don't feel compassionate toward them. My grandmother tried reasoning with me again, saying I would regret all this once my father was gone and I should take the opportunity to make amends with him before he passed. At that point, I simply hung up because I really didn't want to waste more time talking to them. It became very clear to me that no one in this family was willing to acknowledge the very obvious fact that they had done something very wrong to me and treated me poorly. Asking for compensation for that wasn't unfair or unreasonable. They could argue that I was being heartless at this moment, but they had been just as heartless to me in the past. I don't believe in being the bigger person in this situation. I just think that opens you up to being taken advantage of over and over again, and I didn't want to take that risk. So I was simply doing what I thought was necessary. If that makes me the villain, I'm fine with it. It's not like I'm dealing with anything new. I've been treated like the villain in this family for the past 4 years anyway. I could simply accept it and get what I want. So if anyone calls me after this to argue, I'll just hang up unless they're calling to tell me that things will go my way. Update 3. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been pretty absent since my last update. The truth is there hasn't been much to talk about since I told them that if anyone contacted me again, it had to be because they'd reached a decision about what they wanted to do, but I didn't want any more arguments. My decision is made, and no one can change it at this point. So, no one spoke to me for about a week and a couple of extra days. Then, finally, I was contacted by the most unexpected person, my brother. He sent me an email saying he had no idea that our parents had reached out to me, and that he had only found out about it a couple of days before sending me the email. He said he had heard about the condition I had imposed and told me there was no way I'd get away with it. He was angry at our parents for contacting me as it went against his own benefit. He said he had won because he knew that now, since they were upset, our parents would do everything possible not to lose him too. That meant I wasn't going to get what I wanted, so I'd better give up hope of ever taking control of the company because it was now his. I didn't even bother replying. I simply blocked the email address he was sending from. I resumed my normal life and tried not to let my family cross my mind, but today my father messaged me. He said he had thought long and hard about it and decided he wasn't going to fire my brother and that things would remain as they were. He profusely apologized for mistreating me and said that even my mother and the rest of the family were genuinely sorry and would always be willing to reconnect with me in the future. He only reached out because he wasn't sure how much longer he'd be around. However, his doctors have told him there's no immediate threat since his health has slightly improved and will continue improving as long as he takes his medication on time. I'm glad things are better for him, but for now, he doesn't think it's right to fire my brother just because I said so, even though he did the same to me. Anyway, I wasn't disappointed at all. In a way, I had anticipated this, so I was mentally prepared for it. But what I didn't expect was my father saying he would be willing to fund my new business since he knew I had started a company a couple of years ago that I was managing. Maybe I'll take his offer because I am in fact looking for investors, and this could be a good way for him to make amends for his past mistakes. But that depends on whether I feel like it in the future. For now, I'm staying away from my family as I have in the past. Update 4. In the last update, many asked if I had accepted my father's offer and how my brother had reacted. Well, a few months have passed, but here's my update on all of this. I would have liked to respond sooner, but I was waiting for some paperwork to be finalized. First of all, yes, I accepted my father's offer, but with a condition. I didn't want it to be a loan or an investment. What I wanted was what I was owed for being wrongfully dismissed at the time. I didn't want to be tied to my father or his company, especially if the money came from his business. I didn't want to be tied to my brother either. So, the money came as a gift, with no strings attached, which is perfect for my business since I've been able to purchase more vehicles to expand and open a branch in another city. It's not at the level of my father's company, but this serves as a significant growth leap. Maybe in about 10 or 15 years I'll be at that level. As for my brother, many predicted he wouldn't take it well, but there wasn't much he could do. I mean, he can't make up another lie to get me fired. Well, now that I think about it, maybe he could have made up another lie, but at least I haven't heard about it, and most of the money has already been deposited and used. In short, I only know from my father that my brother wasn't too happy about the idea, but he hasn't contacted me. I don't know if he hasn't tried or couldn't due to being blocked. Now that I think about it, I haven't checked my spam folder either. Maybe I'll do that later. And as for my family in general, not much has changed. The money, to me, isn't a form of forgiveness but rather a business transaction. They wrongfully fired me, and this is what I was owed, no more and no less. They've never issued a genuine apology or taken any action against my brother for lying. Honestly, I don't think they even believe he lied. So I don't think there's a relationship or family to rebuild. I don't know if my father expected his money to serve as an apology or not, but it certainly hasn't worked for me. Update 5. I checked my spam folder, and there were several messages from my brother. I only read the first one, assuming the rest followed the same tone, so I didn't think it was worth my time. In the email, he accused me of having no shame, claiming that not only had I stolen from the company, but now I was also taking money from our parents. For anyone hoping he might confess to his lies, I don't think my brother would ever be foolish enough to leave written evidence. He went on to say that he would do everything in his power to prevent me from scamming our parents and ensuring I didn't receive a single cent from them. But as things turned out, he clearly didn't succeed. I hope this puts an end to my story. Update 6. I didn't expect to return to Reddit 5 months later, as I thought my last update would truly be the final one. But here I am with something new to share. Over the past few weeks, my father has been calling me repeatedly. It turns out, for him, the money he gave me was his way of apologizing for everything. According to him, it was meant as a gesture to help us move past everything and reunite as a family. He said he had been waiting all this time for me to see things that way and reach out to reconnect. That was why he hadn't contacted me earlier. I asked him directly about the accusations my brother had made. I wanted to know if they now believed me or if they would at least apologize for claiming I had stolen from them. His response? He said it was all in the past and we should act as if it never happened. That response infuriated me because it's not as simple as pretending none of it occurred. You don't just get abandoned by your family, cut off completely, and then suddenly let everything go because of money. It doesn't work that way.